Happy Sunday! Mike from Hound Dog Media here, and it's time for another episode of Con to Couch. With so many conventions delayed or canceled this year, we're bringing the best guests and coolest hangouts of that experience right to you in the comfort of your own home. Today, we're celebrating the release of the Gamesmaster, almost famous in the Geek 80s. It's available at major booksellers like Amazon and Barnes & Noble, and signed copies are still available through Rarebird Publishing and the show links. Today, we've got two special guests with a deep connection to the Transformers franchise. Paul Davids is credited on 79 episodes of the classic 80s Transformers series and serves as both a writer and the series production coordinator. Livio Ramondelli is a prolific comics artist with an extensive run on IDW's Transformers comic book series, and he also drew the excellent cover for the Gamesmaster. We're really glad to have him on today, and without further ado, here's Flint Dille.
We forgot to mention, Livio also did the cover for my book, right? And so, you can order your special laser etched version. Just kidding. I'd actually kind of like it. Version. Anyway, it's really great to have these two guys on at the same time because what's really funny is they're both people who I don't think had ever met each other before today, but are incredibly familiar to me for totally opposite reasons. Paul, I remember back from 85, 84, whenever we first
85 and 86.
Yeah. It's, Paul was where it was like the producer that wore the hat that didn't yell at me a lot. He was incredibly patient when I'd be changing dialogue on the fly and letting Chris Latta riff for hours on end and stuff like that. Because usually it was a contact sport, but Paul is just totally cool with the stuff. And then Paul also took us on the now infamous journey to Forrest J. Ackerman's Acker Mansion. Do you know about that, Livio?
I know a bit about it. Yeah.
Yeah. That was my first. Forrest Ackerman was my first contact with Deep Geek, and it actually started before you took me over there. But what was amazing was how when I first saw Amazing Forrest magazine, my dad's place, how I was just like shocked and appalled, and how by the time I actually got to the Forrest J. Acker Mansion, I thought it was one of the coolest things in the world, and just I realized I'd learned a lot over the few years.
Flint, can I break in and tell you that Forrest was really very influential in the fact that I went into film and television in the first place. I was a monster movie fan. Going back to the first issue of Famous Monsters of Filmland. That was 1958. And I entered his amateur movie making contest for Famous Monsters. I had been making a lot of monster movies in 8mm with my friends. I got to meet Fari at the first World Science Fiction, no, not the first World Science, I'm sorry, at a World Science Fiction Convention at the Statler Hilton in Washington, D.C., when I was a young teenager, and I was one of the winners of that contest. And the fact that when I was like 14 years old, I got a letter from Hollywood, special delivery letter from Fari addressed to master movie maker Paul Davids. My head just swelled, bigger than this screen. And I just carried with me the belief that I could go on and I could leave Maryland and I could do that one day. And I got to know Fari so well. I must have seen him many dozens of times.
Also, too, let me break in on you. You actually did the defining documentary about him.
Yes,
which is a really just if you want to understand that world, it was him, Ray Harryhausen, Ray Bradbury, right?
Yes.
And they were all alive at that exact moment. And I remember the night we went to the screening. I don't remember Ray Bradbury being there because I would have talked to him, but the other two were there, right?
Well, Ray Harryhausen and Forrest J. Ackerman attended a screening of the Sci-Fi Boys at the Hitchcock Theater on the Universal Studios lot.
That's right. I was there for that.
Well, we also had a major premiere at the Egyptian Theater showing with one of the bonus features for Peter Jackson's King Kong. It was a great phase of my life. The movie, The Sci-Fi Boys, really talked about how people of like Forrest J. Ackerman, Ray Harryhausen, how they influenced all of the science fiction and special effects filmmakers who came later. And it actually won the Saturn Award for the best DVD. I think it was 2006, I think is when it
No,
came out.
it is really a thing people ought to see. Let me switch over to Livio for a second, just so he isn't like sitting there wondering, "Well, what am I doing on this thing?" So Livio, okay, what was it? 6 years ago that we met? 7 years ago?
Yeah, for the Autocracy trilogy, I think.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah. Okay. So the backstory on this is, well, you didn't even know Chris at that point.
No, I met both of you guys literally on stage of a panel. We were about to start in about 10
That's
seconds.
right. That's right. And well, okay, so what happens is this. It's a great story. I hope Chris watches this. I invited him to be on, and he may come on sometime. But anyway, we were sitting there working on just the final run on Diablo 3. I was just there, kind of as a consultant helping out, with the project for about the last 6 months of Diablo 3. And one day Chris turns around and says, "Hey, would you like to do a Transformer graphic novel with me?" And I said, "We went through Diablo. I mean, this will be nothing." And it was supposed to be a 22-page graphic novel. Okay, that's what it was. That was the commitment here. And just Chris, I mean, he hadn't done anything outside of Blizzard, and he's like, no, as I was soon to learn, knew far more about Transformers than I did. And but I was going to learn that the hard way in about 3 months. I didn't know that at that point. Because his office was like a shrine to all the stuff we were doing in the '80s, and with a lot of Marvel stuff in there too. So anyway, we started talking. I think it was John Barber at that point. I'm trying to remember who the first editor we were talking to, because they're really good guys. But anyway, they went along with it, and finally, we had a deal. We're about to go on a panel to talk about it. And they said, "Oh, here's your artist." And no, I think they showed us your stuff first, and we said, "This guy's perfect. Who is this guy?" And then they introduced him. We realized, well, the guy's a jerk, but his art's really great. I mean, we're just going, "Wow, this is great." Okay, we thought it was so great. I mean, bear in mind that, at that moment, I'm doing up to my neck and stuff, the Geo projects and stuff. And Chris is in the course of this would go from Diablo to Overwatch to vacation, basically, and I mean, you talk about a demolition derby. But anyway, and we got it done, and we ended up at like 350 pages. I mean, how long did our 22-page graphic novel end up?
Yeah, I think we worked on it because we did one and they asked us to do 2 sequels. So it was about 300 some pages of work over like 3 years.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah.
I'm not even sure I got paid for that. I know Chris didn't, because he couldn't, because he was at Blizzard. And I think in solidarity, I thought, well, it's not really right for me to get paid if he's not getting paid. But anyway, maybe I did. I don't know. I didn't give it to the church. Who knows? But anyway, I mean, that was one of the most prodigious bodies of work I've ever done in my life, and not noticed doing. You guys really, I mean, first one I'd say was kind of all three of us. I would say second one was you and Chris, and I'm like 15%. I don't remember why that was. Third one was kind of you and I, and Chris was, I think, in the throes of Overwatch at that point.
Yeah,
I mean, he was very much there. Let us not, say he wasn't there, but I mean, it was just a really interesting, combo. It was an interesting working pattern. We got a lot done.
Yeah. No, I gotta say, from my experience, I remember I was kind of new to comics, and when I'd done a couple tiny Transformers issues, and when they came to me, they're like, "Do you want to?" I hadn't even met you at the time, Flint. They were like, "Do you want to do basically this dark origin of Optimus Prime with Flint and Chris Metzen?" And I was like, a moron would have like, "Of course I'm going to do that." Yeah. And
it was really fun. I mean, that was just this. It's what's really great. I mean, this is kind of the part of the book that's kind of the writer part of the book, but
yeah,
you always got to have these weird projects going on the side that you're not even sure why you're doing them, but they're really great to be doing them. And I'm very proud of the work we did in that. I mean, it's great stuff. It's not, it's not like a TV show where you have hundreds of millions of people watching it. But I mean, that was, that's I stand behind that. That was just great work.
Yeah. Yeah. It was a great project. I really enjoyed it. Yeah.
And then also too, for fans out there, and then we'll open this up and everybody will start talking. But you're also the artist who did the Blu-ray DVD cover for Transformers the movie.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, the most recent one. Yeah,
totally separate from G1. He is,
Yeah.
he is, he has actually put his hands on real 1986 material.
True.
So, all right. So one of the things we were talking about before this, and we can loop this conversation around any way we want, but it was really interesting was we were talking about the difference between Livio does a lot of commissions. Okay, we can explain how a commission works.
Yeah, so basically, a commission is when someone comes to you and they tell you what they would like, and you give them an original piece, a custom piece based on their request. So for me, I'm kind of known for a lot of sci-fi work, so I tend to get a lot of Transformers, Star Wars commissions. If people are known for like Batman, they'll get more superhero kind of stuff.
Right.
And the original art game is really huge these days because the original art is worth kind of more and more. And there's this active, like some people keep them, some people resell them, but it's a real kind of global. I do commissions. I've been lucky enough to go to Comic-Cons all over the world, and every single country and city wants original art.
Because the original art that you generate, it is a one-off. Like somebody can say, "Hey, look, this is on paper." I didn't know any of this stuff. By the way, I learned this stuff while we were in the wait up room, before this broadcast. So I just never knew how it worked. I mean, It's like, I've always been obviously been around this most of my life, but I'm not an artist, so I have no idea how being an artist works.
Sure.
So you do the original. So you give the original in a form to somebody where it forever will be the original. And if you do prints of it, it buffs the value of the original.
Yeah, and there's some commissions too that become covers of published work, which really jumps up the original art too.
Yeah.
So yeah. But yeah, I mean, the art market's amazing. I mean, if you look at the prices on, we'd mentioned, Paul and I were just talking about Drew Struzan a little bit earlier. Like, you can look at the originals of his kind of movie posters and what those go for these days, and it's amazing the amount of money. Yeah,
I was explaining that my wife and I wrote 6 of the Star Wars sequel books after the Transformer show was done, and Drew Struzan did the covers for those. It started with the Glove of Darth Vader, Prophets of the Dark Side. We had Lost City of the Jedi. Anyway, there were 6 of them, and Drew's covers are, his work goes for hundreds of thousands of dollars now. When you look at all the posters that he's done of the movies that are the great icons of our era, including the Indiana Jones and the Star Wars posters. So that was kind of luck to have that association with Drew Struzan through those books.
That's amazing.
But the one of the things I wanted to bring up that we were talking about before was generally the collectors
value and depend on what it is. Like, I have Frank's first drawing of Violent Marv on the wall next to me. So is that going to go up in value over time?
Oh yeah, I mean, well, also
from Sin City.
Yeah, I mean, that stuff. Like, I know a friend who had the splash page from Preacher back when Preacher was a very respected comic.
And he wrote it to me. I'm not selling it, so nobody bug me. But yeah, I'm just curious. But yeah, so the first one of that stuff.
Yeah, so a friend of mine a couple years ago had this first splash page from Preacher, which is this really acclaimed Garth Ennis comic. And I told him, I'm like, not only is it worth money now, but eventually this thing was going to be a TV show or a movie. You really should hold on to this. So he did, and of course, not only was it a movie, but the artist tragically passed away. So when someone passes away, the art also jumps up. So yeah, a Marv Sin City original. Yeah.
Jack Kirby back at Ruby Spears that nobody's ever seen. Like, I'd be able to retire and everything, right? Wow. Well, yeah. See, I mean, I didn't know how that worked at all because Paul actually is also an artist, but he tends to do fine art. Not, I'm just looking at your art page, and that looks like, it's not superheroes flying around. But the only kind of artifacts we really have that we can sell is just like crap from the day. Okay, and you were somebody had asked a question. Sorry, somebody asked me a question on Facebook, which was this, and that is when you brought your treasure trove of production materials to conventions, one item that appears to be absent is your script from his first episode of Cosmic Rust. Okay, does he still have it? And if not, does he want it back? Because I managed to persuade the owner of the first draft to provide scans a while back.
Right. Well, I don't mind there being scans. I think that's fine for people to have access to the original material. Yes, I have the original script for Cosmic Rust.
And for Cosmic Rust worth anything? What determines the value of?
Well, let me tell you, Flint, the original Transformers memorabilia is it's worth a small fortune now. I remember at one of the BotCons, I brought scraps of paper from my desk when I was production coordinator, just like, and it was, I don't even think it was original. I think it was a copy of a memo that I wrote that was keeping track of a whole bunch of the shows and what the production schedule was and when they were due from the different overseas companies. Sold for $400, just this one little scrap of paper from my desk then. I remember that. And people wonder why there are so few cells of the original Transformers available in the collector's market. Have you guys noticed that?
I never saw cells when I was working on the show. Never.
Well, the reason is we use 3 overseas companies to actually do the cells. We would do the color mock-ups at Marvel in Los Angeles, but the actual cells, some of them were done at Toei in Japan, ACOM, which was Nelson Shin, the executive producer's company in Korea.
Transformer World.
And then there was a company in the Philippines that did some of them. So they were parsed out, and the cells didn't make it back to the United States. Most of the cells, they washed them off and they reused the celluloid for the subsequent shows.
Wasn't a lot of our stuff drawn on actual paper too?
Well, there would be a drawing on paper. So there were those drawings. I haven't seen many of those, but I have some cells because sometimes Nelson go to Korea, or producer Gerald Muller would sometimes be in Korea, and would bring back cells for me from shows that I had written. I wrote Chaos and Cosmic Rust and Grimlock's New Brain, and one that you were story editor on, The Thief in the Night.
Oh yeah.
So I have cells from those. And I have
established you shot a Carbamia from a storyboard. What's that worth?
It would be worth a death sentence overseas in some Arab countries, is what it would be worth. I had a Grimlock transform in 9 cells. So I had these 9 cells that show the progression of Grimlock's transform, and I gave them to my son. He framed them. They're going down a hallway in his house. And I had sold some cells and some original art using Profiles in History is one of the auction sites.
Right.
They do a lot of auctions of Hollywood memorabilia there. And after I sold some of the stuff, my son really got all over me. And he said, don't you dare sell anything else that you've got. That all is going to belong to me one day. And I one other thing I want to pop in at you. I have this Xerox with several pieces of paper all strung together. Was a size comparison chart of the different Transformers characters. We had to keep track of all their sizes. And I had the Xerox. It's the only surviving chart like that in the world. And my son was over at the house one day, and I was showing it to some friends, and it went home with him, and I've never seen it again.
I believe I still have mine. It's somewhere. That's.
Do you have the actual size comparison?
I took everything in my office. I'm still really impressed that I didn't take the general flag with me, but we had these 70-degree, 75-degree stairs in Sunbow, and I wasn't going to haul it downstairs. And Joe and Tom wanted it back, and so.
The other thing that is of such value to the collectors, of course, are the storyboards. And I'm not even talking about the originals now. I'm talking about the Xeroxes with the original Marvel covers on them.
Yep.
We used pink and green covers depending upon whether it was a first draft or a final.
Draft. It was an artifact of green pages and pink pages.
That was it. And those are, even though they're just Xeroxes on legal size paper, they're worth a fortune if they have the original green or pink covers on them, because it dates them back to 1985 and 1986. It was a thrill ride.
That Paul Davids is saying this is real, or Paul Davids could be lying about it, but you can sort of look at the paper and see whether it's real.
Yeah, no, my signature on it certifying that it's real, it seems to be sufficient. But
I can tell you also with memorabilia and collecting these days, IDW, the company that Flint and I worked for Transformers Comics, they produce these artist edition books. I don't know if you guys have seen these, but the intended thing is to make them look as close to the original art, including like coffee stains and handwritten notes. They want them to look like it's on someone's dirty desk. They want it to be as authentic. They don't want it cleaned up. And so fans love seeing, you wrote down a phone number for groceries while you were reading a script. Like they love being in that moment,
That's what I was asking. So provenance matters that way.
Yeah.
It's like I have a lot of old Buck Rogers stuff. And some of it, like I have the guns, but they're like my grandfather's guns. And I'm wondering, okay, are they more valuable because they're my grandfather's guns than if there were any other guns in the universe?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I would say so. Yeah. The connection of, like you didn't just buy it. You have a family connection to something that's also famous. Yeah.
The other thing I was going to frame up and put next to the Buck Rogers guns is the Megatron I had, which is horribly mangled, showing my frustration with being unable to put it together. There was the one sitting on my desk at Sunbow, and I just thought it looked really funny because remember he was originally a Walther PPK, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and so if I frame that up, my grandchildren, that will be valuable for them.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. 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 That would be valuable now. If you sold that now and said it was on your desk making the original series. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I know I have that. I've seen that in the last 2 months.
Yeah.
You just find these weird things. I mean, what I did find that I think is actually valuable for an entirely different reason, I can't do anything with it, is what would have been, can you see this? What would have been the second season of Inhumanoids. It's the first 2 episodes. And one was final and approved, and the other was just my first draft of it. But there's something really cool about now. Inhumanoids obviously is less valuable because it's more obscure, or it may be more valuable because it's one thing nobody's ever seen. People always ask what the next season of something would have been. And this is one of the few cases where there's actually an answer.
Oh.
But anyway, so all right. So basically what there is, because I've never thought or really talked about this stuff before. I mean, I know it exists. I've seen it out the corner of my eye because I've seen people sell stuff, or people want me to sign some storyboard that they bought, and it's like, really, because I mean that stuff was just viewed as rubbish at the time, and maybe that's why it's valuable. It's rare because everybody threw it out.
Well, it's funny too, because you'll see dueling memorabilia groups sometimes. Like one that always makes me laugh is, the Ghostbusters Ecto-1 car?
Yeah.
Whatever that hearse is actually based on, there's so few of those left that people that love that car buy them just to prevent them from being bought by Ghostbusters fans and turn into the Ghostbusters car. So you'll see dueling groups of fans for memorabilia.
With Ecto-1, wow.
Yeah, same with the DeLorean for Back to the Future. People buy them to prevent them from being made into the time machine.
No,
oh yeah.
Speaking of the lightsabers, how many people know that the executive producer and really key guy behind the Transformers television series, Nelson Shin, was actually the one who did the lightsabers and the rotoscoping for the original Star Wars movie.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Yeah, no, I did know that. And that becomes really obvious is take a look at the way the movie is lit. Okay, I mean, half the genius of the Transformers, the movie, is Nelson Shin's lighting. I mean, who figures out, hey, let's take the color out of Optimus Prime to show he died? I mean, I would never think of that.
Yeah.
His office was like the prototype producer's office with the storyboard drawings all over the walls. All 4 walls of the office. Going into the office, it was like just taking a tour through the movie, shot, every shot. And one story I like to tell is, how did I end up on the Transformers in the first place? Because when I was hired, I didn't really know anything about the Transformers. I had recently, I was a graduate of the American Film Institute Center for Advanced Film Studies. I was one of the first 16 guys there, which was a great opportunity. And one of the early students there was Gerald Muller. And Gerald, who was an artist, and he'd suffered a lot of unemployment, but he finally got hired as the production coordinator for the first Transformers shows. I think it was around the first 8 or 10 shows. And then they decided he was so good, they were going to move him over to be the production coordinator of your Transformers movie, Flint. So Nelson asked Gerald Muller, we need to clone you. You know, who should we get who has the potential to do what you've done for the series? And I had been in touch with Gerald a lot recently at that time. And he told Nelson Shin, get Paul Davids. So I had never heard of the Transformers. I was called into Nelson's office. At that time, I was working in the IT division of Columbia Pictures, having been relieved of my duties in the Beverly Hills branch office of Columbia Pictures Distribution. I was pretty unhappy with what I was doing, but I had this meeting with Nelson Shin, and I knew a lot about animation. And so, you know, I impressed him in that meeting. He asked me how much I was making. He doubled my salary. I said, when do you want me to start, Nelson? He looked at his watch and he said, well, you know, we're going out to lunch, so it can't be before 2:00. So why don't we start at 2:00? I went back to Columbia Pictures IT and I resigned. That's what I did with the 2-hour break in there.
Your shadow was still on the wall by the time you got out of there.
Yeah, they said bon voyage. We wish you best of luck with your other things. And then I had to start from scratch learning who Optimus Prime and Megatron were, and all of those 150 characters. It was just all dumped on me immediately. I had to get up to speed so quickly. It was wonderful though. And everybody there was. Mark Bakshi worked there too on Transformers. Did you know that? Ralph Bakshi?
Ralph Bakshi's son?
Yeah, he was there. He joined us. And
wow, I did not know that. But I saw a little.
He was there about half the time. He was always back and forth to Korea, to ACOM.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I never saw Korea, but I saw Nelson and obviously Jerry Moeller a lot, but not none of them. The last time I saw Nelson though was at when we were doing the 25th, the voice track for the 25th anniversary edition.
And you saw him then. See, I haven't
You're
seen
still
it.
young. What? Yeah, it's pretty funny. Anyway, so all right, so I'm trying to think what else should we be talking about? I drove
your book a little, Flint,
What?
because I loved it. And I've ordered a hardback copy for my son. I sent my son the cover, and he just said, "Oh wow!" And Livio, you did the cover, right?
I did. Yeah, it was an honor. It was an honor. I was a G1 fan, and yeah. So
the
yeah.
consensus is it's a great cover. It's a fabulous. It really gets your attention. And Flint, your book, it brought me back to those days so much, you know, and I'm a little bit of a part of it. I think I come in on page 260.
You have a couple of really great moments.
We talk a lot about the controversy over Thief in the Night.
Pictures. I have a picture where you can actually see my face in it. I think maybe sometime in the past with Forey Ackerman.
Hey, listen, let me tell you guys who are listening something that might creep you out a little bit, but we've been talking about Forrest J. Ackerman. And, you know, I have produced and directed around 15 feature films. They've been distributed, most of them by NBC Universal to television. But one of them in particular, I want to mention, after Forey died at age 92, and he died.
This is your afterlife movie.
Yeah, he died in 2008, and he was an atheist, and he didn't believe in an afterlife. But he said jokingly to me, you know, it turns out I'm wrong, and there's a big sci-fi convention in the sky. He said, I'll do my best to drop you a line. And we all laughed. Well, my life turned into the Twilight Zone after he died, Flint. It was just incredible. After we had this big memorial tribute for him at the Egyptian Theater, that week, several of us who were there started having genuinely paranormal, inexplicable things related to Forey happening to us. I couldn't believe it, but there was physical evidence of a message from Forey in which the ink on a document was changed while I was alone in the house. And I got chemistry labs involved in studying this ink, and was continued for a period of years of all of these paranormal things happening to me related to Fari, like he was in touch with me. And I made a movie about it called The Life After Death Project. It has part 1 and part 2. Part 2 is on Amazon Prime, but I want people to see part 1 first, which you have to get the DVD. It's a 2 DVD set. It's called The Life After Death Project. And then I wrote it into a 500-page book with Gary Schwartz called An Atheist in Heaven. And that's the atheist is Fari. But I just want people to know this is true. This really.
Okay, so your Believo-meter on this is 9 on a 1 to 10 scale.
It's 100% now, because yeah, the number of things that happen, and I got universities involved in studying the evidence, and not only were the scientists baffled, who thought that they could begin by explaining it, in a day or two, and then they studied for 3 years this ink anomaly. And then one of them, John Allison, a chemistry professor in New Jersey, started to become haunted by Fari too. Things happened to him related to Fari, just absolutely mind-boggling. Some of them caught on camera while we were filming, because I did the documentary by taking my camera to the science labs, the chemistry labs, and filming as the studies were going on.
Did you make that face behind you on the screen there? Did you make that appear, or did that is that
the face behind you on the screen?
Oh, the face behind you on the screen.
The face behind me? Where is that face?
That shadowy guy walking around behind you. I don't know what that's about.
Yeah, I see it too.
I don't know. I think you're pulling my leg, but I'm not pulling your leg. This stuff really happened. So I've been in touch with Fari for many years.
I'm all in. I mean, you're shooting fish in a barrel with me, but I know I love it. I love it.
Can I ask you both a question? When you were working on the original G1 series, now that we're going 36 some years later and it's still this blown thing, at the time, how long did you think people were going to remember that series? If you were putting bets.
I hope that they would remember it the following year.
Yeah.
Because there were reruns.
Probably till the
reruns. But we had no concept that this would ever be live action features, or that, when Rhino made their boxed sets, DVDs of season 1, 2, 3, and they restored the original 35 millimeter, prints of Transformers to do that. It was just fantastic, because it really kept it alive for new generations too. I was so happy with what Rhino did. But there was no concept that this would be as big.
No, like, because you see that this world, I mean, we've talked about this a little bit before, but it's interesting because it came up. The whole world of fans and collectors and everything being evergreen, that didn't exist then. I mean, like when we were kids, the DVD had just become a common thing everybody had in their house, probably I'd say 81, 82. Like the rich people I knew had them in the late 70s, but I mean, that was a real investment. And but I mean, usually you would record your own, record things off TV, and like one time in 5, I'd set it up properly and actually record, and then you record over it. And then the pre-bought things, but they were really expensive at that point. So, I didn't see, I mean, what's really funny is it was so obvious, and yet I didn't even see it. I mean, because, right around then was when I first started going to Comic-Con. And what did I do at Comic-Con? I spent my first 2 years at Comic-Con either A, buying pulp magazines because I'd never really actually seen one before, or B, rebuying my childhood.
Yeah.
Should have known that, 30 years later, people would be doing the same thing.
Yeah.
Except the weird thing that I could not have known is your childhood would never go away. I mean, it's like when a TV show went off the air when I was a kid, it would show up 5 years later on a syndicated channel.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And you could use no reliability when it was gone. It was like really gone. Now, unless you're Firefly, you're always picked up and renewed and brought back and all that. But
yeah,
it's not the way it worked then.
The breakthrough in digital.
To answer your question is, it never occurred to me I'd be talking about this now. No.
No.
Yeah.
You know, one of the old special effects guys from the really early days, from the really, you know, you talk about B horror movies. Well, he did the D- horror movies, Paul Blaisdell, some of them for Roger Corman, but he created the monsters for things like From Hell It Came, Invasion of the Saucer Men, The She Creature. And this was real 1950s drive-in fare, you know, and, you know, these were regarded as such cheap, awful movies with monsters that, you know, you laughed at them. And yet every single one of Paul Blaisdell's creations is today, you know, it's an icon. It's, you know, they're loved today. They live on today. And he died absolutely, you know, penniless, you know, like Ed Wood, you know, an abject failure in his time, right? Who is memorialized and remembered because a lot of that junk from back then became our junk, you know, our wonderful, wonderful junk that we grew up with and we loved. And I guess maybe some people had disrespect for the Transformers, but hard to disrespect a $1 billion industry with 150 toys behind it, though, you know?
No, we knew this stuff was making a lot of money. That much we knew.
Yeah.
You know, that was clear to us, and we were. I mean, you know, it was just a, you know, a real boom town.
Well, we were also the #1 children's animated show for television in the country at that time. It kept going back and forth between G.I. Joe and the Transformers. We would get these memos from Margaret Lesh saying, you know, we were #1 again this week. And, you know, who
I remember there was one moment at Sunbow when I was I think I was talking to Tom. It may have been Joe, but I think it was Tom. He was saying, you realize you're working on the 1, 2, 3, and 4 shows on you know, on syndicated TV, and it's like, okay,
yeah.
I'll go for that.
And it was controversial then because there were problems being raised in Congress about these shows.
It was Joe Lieberman was like waived most of the products I worked on in that period around at Congress.
You know, they were saying that, you know, these are half-hour advertisements for toys with no socially redeeming value for children. And
so that's why we had to play this battle.
What?
That's why we had the PSAs, is that was, you know,
yeah.
Because knowing is half the battle. You know, half the battle is blue lasers, the other half's red lasers. But
yeah, we had to redeem ourselves somehow.
Yeah.
There's a really grand irony that the notion that Optimus Prime, this thing that was maybe created to sell toys, became one of the most beloved parental figures for multiple generations now. Like people have never even seen Transformers love that character. They know what that character means. Like, there's a true irony that is the legacy of that character.
Well, because what I would say is I've never had more creative freedom than I did working on that. I mean, you know, Hasbro just did not in any way interfere. I mean, there are times I kind of wish they'd interfere more, but I mean, they didn't care. They didn't, you know, second guess our stories. We knew the rules, but because we'd been in Saturday morning jail, so, you know, we knew, you know, we were shocked by the amount of freedom we had, as opposed to, you know, nobody was trying to break the rules except Buzz. But yeah, he was always doing something mischievous in there, see if he could slip something past us. But I mean, and Hasbro just, you know, went with it, you know, until of course Optimus died, then that was a problem. But
we had a problem. Flint, we had a problem then. You know, looking back, I think the stories were really good. The scripts were really imaginative, and a lot of that credit goes to you, Flint, because you were story editor. It wasn't just that you wrote them, but those of us who were writers on the show, we'd have our premises approved by you, and then you would help us through draft after draft. You had an imprint on a lot of those shows that you didn't write, but that you edited. And then, of course, Bryce Malek.
Yep. And
Bryce's partner's name?
What? Dick Robbins was his partner.
Dick Robbins. They were a team.
Those are great guys. Yeah.
Marv Wolfman, I think, also did some story editing.
Marv Wolfman came in and basically replaced me in season 3 when I was doing Inhumanoids and Visionaries. I mean, I never really left, but I couldn't just keep sorting Transformers and work on G.I. Joe and do Visionaries and Inhumanoids. I just kind of, you know.
Yeah. Well, and it also, the show gave a chance to a lot of new talent.
Yep.
And that included me at that time. It kind of did for the 1980s what Roger Corman was doing, in earlier decades.
And
Because
that
Roger
was
Corman would soak up talent wherever he saw it. You'd be young guys just out of film school directing a Roger Corman movie. I would have loved to do that. It didn't happen for me, but Transformers did, and it was kind of equivalent.
Mm-hmm. No, it was very, because I worked with Roger Corman on Battle Beyond the Stars, and the art director on that, and I was kind of his PA for a while, was Jim Cameron. You talk about starting careers, and he got to direct Piranha 2 because he did an absolutely brilliant job in Battle Beyond the Stars. I think he did Piranha 2. Somebody check that on IMDb.
There were dozens of major talents that began working for dimes for Roger Corman.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, well, but it was because it was a transition between film school and the real industry.
Yes.
There was no real apprenticeship that time, and so it was Roger Corman, and almost him uniquely. There was nobody else who had this B movie company that would hire. Jack Nicholson got his first job. Francis Coppola, I think, directed his first film for Roger Corman.
Yes.
I think Ronnie Howard did too, as a matter of fact, but I'm not positive about.
Didn't Jack Nicholson get his start as an actor with Roger Corman too?
Yeah, a lot of people did. A lot of people. Yeah, well, I have the whole Corman thing in the book, but I mean, in the case of our thing, it was if I just point to a specific person, it was Steve Gerber, because what he did, we'd get 65 episodes a year, and that's just of GI Joe, and then it'd be 65 of Transformers. So Steve would recommend these people. There were comic book guys in New York, and if you gave them a 3-script deal, that was $18,000, and that would pay for their whole move. Yeah, and then some. Remember, this is 1985 to LA, wow. And so out with that came Marv Wolfman, Len Wein, Roger Slifer. Roger's story was a little more complex than that because he actually became a Sunbow employee in New York and then came out.
Right.
Trying to think of who else, but there were a bunch.
Roger was supervising a lot of our product while he was still in New York.
And I don't know whether Steve discovered Christy Marks or whether Sunbow already knew about her. I don't know that story. But I mean, it's like Steve really opened the door for this floodgate of people coming in. I had Jim Ward write an episode. I brought in some guys because I was the only game guy around. Everybody else comics, right? And so a couple of those guys got shots, but it was really Steve that just started this flood of people.
Well, the other area is, of course, the voice talent.
Yep.
We had about 150 actors doing the voices for Transformers. It was a really, really long list. And, I think Wally Burr auditioned all of them. And we had some really top people, famous people.
Well, there were a couple exceptions. The big one being Chris Latta, who Joe Bacall saw doing a stand-up act. He's Starscream and Cobra Commander. And I would say he was probably the least professional voice actor in the room, but he might have been the voice that defined us, because all the rest of them were just the creme de la creme of voice actors. I mean, they were the best. And then, as we went on, there were just people we kept using. Greg Berger showing up and all of our stuff. And well, I don't want Neil Ross showing up and all of it. And obviously Frank Welker, showed up and everything. And
Peter Cullen. Well,
Peter Cullen. I mean, all those guys. And, if you look at all of our shows, they were in all of them. But some of them, interestingly enough, were in a thing I did for Ruby Spears. It was my first robot show. An amazing number of them showed up in that thing. So these were top people, but then infused with a certain amount of lunacy from New York, and it became a super team. And these guys are incredible.
Well, they all had to audition every time Hasbro came out with a new toy. They had auditions for the voices for that toy.
That is correct.
It had to be approved by Sunbow, had to be approved by Nelson Shin, had to be approved by Wally Burr, who was the voice director of all the shows, had to be approved. Roger Slifer, I think, might have been.
If I was in it, Transformers, it was me, because I'd write the auditions.
Okay.
Okay.
But Hasbro ultimately had to say, didn't they? I mean, we had it cleared by Hasbro.
Which is why I had this really weird position in there, is I'm this noob, kid basically right out of film school, but I'm also the client and I'm also the story editor. I didn't understand any of that at the time. It all became clear later. I mean, I understood the dynamic, but but that's why. I mean, you were one of the first producers that came in that didn't just view me as like pariah, because I didn't understand. I'd never done this before, and
well, I had an ulterior motive, because being a production coordinator was my day job, but I wanted to be a writer, and I knew you were a story editor, so I was kissing up to you, Fred, because I wanted you to improve my premises.
That's why he was nice to me.
Yes. I was right in nights and weekends, but I had my day job there at Marvel. That's it.
Oh, you came up with Carbamia. I mean, almost got all of us fired, but nevertheless, we appreciated that.
Yeah, for those of you listening, that comes in at around page 260 in Flint's.
Paul almost gets Flint fired.
Yeah, your book, I mean, there's obviously this theme of really amazing people coming together on these projects for one thing after another. There's this moment I love so much with Frank Miller with The Dark Knight Returns, where I love the idea of, like, you and Frank are just kicking around ideas that you're working on the death of Optimus Prime. He's working on Batman fighting Superman in what will eventually become maybe the best comic ever, The Dark Knight Returns. And you guys just kicking around these story ideas that, 36 years later, people are still worshiping. And it's just two writer buddies talking. It's a really inspiring. Yeah.
What was funny about it is that was the day I met Frank. Okay. I mean, it was just, Steve Gerber was working with me on, I'm trying to write the death scene. I'm trying to fix it, because there are a number of drafts of it. We had to have Hot Rod a little bit guilty, but not totally guilty. Megatron really treacherous. Optimus, could have beaten him, but was maybe a little more compassionate than he should have been. You had to balance. It's amazingly balanced scene. And so in walks this guy, it was Steve's lunch that day, and we start talking. I don't know whether we ever got lunch, but because he had his Batman Superman fight problem. And by the end of the day, I mean, Frank and I have been best friends ever since then. I mean, it was just, it was one of the best collaborative moments ever, and there was nothing in it for anybody else. I mean, it's gone on for decades.
It's amazing.
It's really cool. But you think about the cultural moment of that, as to how it echoes now 35 years later. And that Dark Knight had a lot to do with the rebirth of superheroes. I mean, a whole lot to do with it. And then he'd of course turn around and do Year One, and then he'd turn around and do Sin City and 300, and the rest is history, and all the Elektra stuff.
Say, I know we don't have much time, Flint, but can I tell?
We got 10 minutes. Yes, yeah.
One of my favorite Stan Lee stories. All right. So Stan Lee was working at Marvel Productions back in those days. We all, got to know him, and we would hang out with him sometimes. And you've got to remember, we're talking 1985, 86. This was before the digital explosion for special effects. Things were, the computer dominance of special effects world had not really begun yet. And here was Stan Lee, who's trying to get Spider-Man off the ground as a movie for many, many years. Now, the technology to really do Spider-Man right didn't exist yet. And it kept he would get set up for a deal, and then the deal would get killed. It happened to Stan Lee about 5 times that he thought that Spider-Man was going to go ahead as a movie, and it fell apart. And I remember one day we had an end of Spider-Man little beer party in Stan Lee's office, where he got us all together to announce, look, I'm giving up. Don't think badly of me, but it's happened to me again. And I know now Spider-Man will never be a movie, and I'm not going to let it bother me. We're done trying. I gave it my best shot. Right. I remember that day. I remember that beer.
Oh, it's really, then that was like in 85, because he was at that point, the first time I ever met him, and I think it's still in the book. I mean, we, near the end, we cut out a bunch of stuff, so I don't know entirely what's in that, because I listened to the audiobook, but you don't remember what's not there. I met him when Marvel, David DePatie was running Marvel. Okay, it was before Lee and Margaret, and they were pitching us doing Buck Rogers. I thought, that's cool. And then they brought in the closer was Stan Lee. They bring in the real Stan Lee. And I remember not knowing what to think, like thinking, is he really Gornish or something that he's like in here talking to me? Okay, cut to a decade later, like literally a decade later, I'm developing Spider-Man and Captain America and the Avengers for ABC with him. I'm sitting there with the real Stan Lee and all that, and I mean, I think that show actually aired. That was Spider-Man went on. That was maybe the last thing I ever did for Saturday morning. But he was really cool to work with. I mean, he was just, because I worked with both him and Jack at different times, Jack Kirby, and both of them were incredibly cool to work with. And one of the tragedies is that they ever stopped working together, because you could totally see how that dynamic worked.
Yeah.
I mean, they're both incredibly talented, enthusiastic guys, and they both had the thing the other guy didn't have. I mean, it's like, John Lennon made great albums after the Beatles. Paul McCartney made great albums, but I don't know that either of them ever did anything as good as what they were doing when they were the Beatles. And that's kind of what my sort of final take on Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. What was funny is one time at Comic-Con, when I met Stan Lee years later, but before I worked with him at ABC, he shows up, and Frank, reintroduces me to him, and I'm not going to say, oh yeah, we met in a Buck Rogers meeting back in 79. I'm not going to say that to him. And he said, well, Frank's the real thing, and I'm a phony. And I'm a self-effacing guy. I mean, it was really cool.
But, Stan Lee wrote the foreword to my first book, which I did when I was at Marvel. It was called The Fires of Pele. Mark Twain,
it was really Photoshop cover.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, it was before Photoshop. No, we didn't even have Photoshop. It was done with dioramas with little puppet monsters mixed with photos of actors.
You see why I thought it was a Photoshop cover, you know what I mean? Because it all
looked Photoshop, but
the mixed media cover as well.
Yeah, exactly. I'd
forgotten that Stan wrote the cover for it. But what was funny about it was, all these guys are like really epic, now, but at the time they were very accessible. That's what's cool about all those guys.
Yeah.
Ray Bradbury was the same way. I mean, they were shockingly accessible and around and friendly and happy to see you. I mean, now, most of the elder guys are, obnoxious and all that. But I mean, back then they were really great,
Shielded off now, sort of.
Well, yeah, I think it's not the same world where both Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, I mean, those guys, you could tell they were just really thrilled about you doing it. I mean, neither of them needed to be doing it. Because, I mean, remember the whole controversy talking about original artwork. Remember the whole controversy over Jack Kirby's original artwork.
Yeah.
I mean, that was
current practices about whether artists can keep their art. A lot of that comes directly from Jack Kirby. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember that whole fight over that. I remember because Frank was pretty involved in that.
Hey, speaking of artists keeping their work, I have too much of my work. I'd be happy. And I'm going to give a plug now for my website where you can see.
Give a plug for your website. Give a plug for anything you want. But my recommendation to you is you ought to merge all your different worlds. Okay, throw a ghost into the landscapes. Throw a crash flying saucer into the background somewhere, and merge all that stuff together. Because your artwork, it's beautiful. I mean, you're great at that stuff. But I don't look at it and say, "Oh, that's Paul Davids." Okay, that isn't the guy doing Afterlife specials and Roswell TV shows and stuff like that. I mean, but bring that stuff into your form.
Yeah, no, it's Paul Davids.
There's
previous incarnation in the 1800s when I was living in France and hanging out with guys like Paul Gauguin, Van Gogh. That's the Paul Davids of my art, and it's Paul Davids. Well, www.pauldavids Paul Davids, Davids, and then a little hyphen, and then artist.com. And I've done hundreds of
throw that in front of my Facebook page too.
Okay. Yeah.
All right, Livio, what do you want to promote? I mean, obviously Kill Lock, but I mean, sorry, you go on.
No, that's even better. You saying it. Yeah. No, I just
read Livio's Kill Lock. Okay, so the dirty secret about Livio, because he can't say it, so I'll borrow it. I'll talk over him for a second. And that is, Livio is a shockingly good writer.
Oh, thank you.
I knew somebody was secretly making Chris and I Totally Make Sense, because all the way through the Autocracy trilogy. And it was Livio. I mean, he may be a young Frank for all I can tell.
That is the highest praise I could imagine. So thank you.
Because you can do both of them, and it was really good. And the way you made sense, because he was explaining to me how to set up transformer shots, which was really humiliating. But nevertheless, it happened to be right in all of it. All right, now go pitch it, but read it. It's great.
No, thank you so much. Yeah, that's.
And he's working on some other secret project, which I've also heard great stuff about, but since it's a secret project, I guess.
I cannot talk about that one. But yes, The Kill Lock, my first original science fiction series that I wrote and drew, is out now. My super long, very Italian name, Livio Ramondelli. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter that way. And it's been great to touch.
A plastic company too, right? Ramondelli, that's like Rotella or something, right?
Yeah.
No, yeah, that's right. That's true. It is a super long name.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, look at Livio's website, look at Paul's website, grab the Kill Lock and pick one. All right, Paul, if there's one thing you think speaks to today of the old stuff for someone to pick up of yours, what would it be?
Well, it's the movie The Sci-Fi Boys, which is still available on DVD through Universal. You can find it at Amazon. Really proud of that movie. And it really captures the whole era of the development of all this stuff that we love with heart, with real feeling for the passion for the creativity behind it. There's a lot of love in that movie and a beautiful music score by Brian Thomas Lambert, who's done several movie scores for me. So the Sci-Fi Boys. And then, of course, see the Life After Death Project. It's a 2 DVD set. And
by the way,
it all happened.
One, and for a special extra added price, I'll sell it. No, I'm just joking. I just never thought about the selling stuff part of all this. That's pretty amusing. So, but I will not sell you DVD at a ridiculous. I think you gave it to me for free, as a matter of fact. So that would be really treacherous of me. So nobody can buy the DVD, but go buy it for real. Is it on Amazon?
Which one are we talking about right now?
The Life After Death.
Oh yeah. The Life After Death Project. You can find it at Amazon. At the part 1 and part 2 together. Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah.
All right. So we're coming up right on 5 o'clock here. Sorry, it's been kind of a weird rambling conversation, but it's kind of fun. Yeah, because you guys see from my point of view, some totally different parts of the experience. It's great.
All right. Hey, I'd like to thank everyone for tuning in today. Especially like to thank Livio and Paul for their time. Really glad to have you guys here. If you guys want to hang out for just a little bit after we go off the line, I'd like to thank you guys privately for taking the time to be with us today. And for the audience, thanks for being with us. Be sure to get your copy of the Gamesmaster, almost famous in the Geek 80s. It's available at major booksellers like Amazon and Barnes & Noble. It's in hardcover format and ebook and audiobook. And you can also still get autographed copies from Rare Bird Publishing, which you will find in the show links. If you enjoy the show, be sure and give us a like, and if you haven't already, subscribe to the channel. If you have an idea for what you'd like to see on a future show, leave us a comment and we'll take a look. Stay tuned for more information on next week's stream.